The manhunt for a third man believed to have been involved in the attack at Brussels airport continues across Belgium. Rwandan women living in the United States celebrate their accomplishments. March 24 marks World Tuberculosis Day. Africa 54 starts right now. Good evening, I'm Linor Moudou. This is Africa 54. Vincent Makori is off today. The massive manhunt for a third man videotaped with 2 Islamic State suicide bombers at Brussels airport continues across Belgium. Intelligence officials say a 25-year-old Islamic State bomb maker who was involved in the Paris attacks in November was one of 2 suicide bombers who targeted the Brussels airport. The man, Najim Lakraoui, was spotted on closed-circuit video with the other bomber at the Brussels airport Tuesday, along with another man who is the subject of a search. A 4th man blew himself up at the metro station. Meanwhile, Turkish officials now say one of the men identified as a suicide bomber at the airport had been detained by Turkey and deported to Europe, where he was released about 8 months ago.
The deportation took place on July 14, 2015 and was administratively recorded. A memo was sent to the embassy in Brussels and the Belgians let this person go.
Erdogan says his government warned authorities in Belgium about Ibrahim el-Brakawi, but the Belgian authorities could not identify a link to terrorism. Meantime, a makeshift memorial to the victims contains to grow in the heart of Brussels. And pressure is mounting on European officials to improve cooperation against terrorism. EU Interior and Justice ministers are holding emergency talks on a joint response to Tuesday's bombings in Brussels, which killed at least 31 people and injured 270. For more on the investigation and manhunts, let's go to reporter Dave Keating, who joins us live via Skype from Brussels. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So where do things stand with this fast-moving investigation?
Well, right now there's still the suspect on the loose. We don't have any more information about him. There were reports of another suspect possibly on the loose, and there was even a sketch being distributed by some Belgian media, but the Belgian authorities have said actually that sketch is not related to this search. And so it appears now there isn't a second suspect on the run. There's just the one. But the more interesting information to come out this afternoon is, as you mentioned, about the suicide bombers who were brothers. We have the claim by Turkey that one of them had been deported and that Turkey had actually warned Belgium and the Netherlands that he was a fighter in Syria. And now we're just getting word just within the past hour or so that the contrary to initial reports, which said the 2 brothers were only known to police for crime and not for terrorism, now we're learning that one of the brothers was being watched as a terror suspect linked to the Paris attacks in November, and that there was even a European arrest warrant issued for him. So kind of incredible that that's completely the opposite of what they said first.
Now, EU members are meeting over this situation. What is transpiring?
Well, yes, so the European Union's Justice and Home Affairs ministers from each member state are meeting just down the road at the European Council building. They are talking about a couple of different ideas for beefing up pan-EU cooperation. And one of the ideas that Germany is bringing to the table and is keen to have adopted is a requirement for entry and exit registration at the EU's external borders. Right now, no record is kept of who is coming into the EU and who's leaving. And so they want all borders facing outside of the EU's Schengen common passport area to start collecting that information.
Now, there has been reports on emerging link to leadership in ISIS in Syria. How direct do authorities think the link is?
It's a bit unclear. I think that the link seems similar to what existed in the Paris attacks, so something relatively loose, but also with a connection to people who had traveled to Syria and had since gone back using their European passports.
So, Dave, here there are reports also that the Belgian government was warned by Turkey about this one brother. How are they reacting? What are they saying?
Right now, there's no response from the government. We have the Justice Minister is inside the European Council building now, meeting with the other ministers. I'm told that it's getting quite heated inside there. A lot of the ministers are not very happy with the way that Belgium has handled this situation, and this latest news about the European arrest warrants and the connection to the Paris attacks is pretty astounding. The Justice Minister and the Home Affairs Minister both have said they offered to resign, but the Prime Minister, Charles Michel, said he would not accept their resignation. Whether they actually offered to resign is unclear. So
Okay, Dave, thank you so much for joining us. And that was Dave Keating reporting live via Skype from Brussels. Now, in an interview with the Voice of America on Tuesday, Michael Hayden, former director of both the U.S. National Security Agency and the CIA, commented on the deadly attacks in Brussels.
This was sadly expected, almost inevitable. And I realize that's a pretty dramatic word, but when you look at what has happened, the target country, part of an arc that we could see. The target itself, in terms of the soft targets, the transportation targets, the maximum civilian casualties, something we could see. The level of sophistication, kind of continuing on that same arc. We've seen ISIS as it, so to speak, ups its game. And I think the only thing that changed the arc that we all saw coming was perhaps the tempo, which was probably sped up by the arrest of one of the terrorists last week. And my sense was they feared what he would tell the police, and so this was a use it or lose it kind of situation with regard to the plot. But again, the great sadness is this is not surprising, and which then suggests it's certainly not the last either.
Michael Hayden is the former director of both the National Security Agency and CIA. U.S. State Department and Pentagon officials testified on Capitol Hill Wednesday about the Obama administration's plans to close the Guantanamo Bay, Cuba detention facility. As VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb reports, some lawmakers suggested that the attacks in Brussels and last year in Paris might persuade European allies to rethink their calls to close the facility.
More than 85% of those detained at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba since 2002 have been transferred out to other countries. Fewer than 100 remain, and the Obama administration wants to shut down the facility. Administration officials say images of the prison, also known as Gitmo, are a reminder of U.S.-authorized waterboarding and long-term detentions without trial.
Countries across the world and allies tell us that Gitmo hurts us. By closing Gitmo, we address a concern of the rest of the world.
Without giving details, Lewis acknowledged that Americans have been killed by former Gitmo detainees who returned to the battlefield.
When anybody dies, it's a tragedy, and we don't want anybody to die because we transfer detainees.
But Lewis said this administration and the previous one believe the importance of closing Gitmo outweighs the risk of keeping it open. Republican lawmakers believe the prison remains as important as ever.
They're so upset with us that it's a recruiting vehicle, that we've kept terrorists who murder innocent people in Gitmo. Well, you know what? I think that the bigger recruiting tool today is when our government, especially this administration, is perceived as being weak.
According to intelligence reporting, less than 5% of Gitmo detainees transferred during the Obama administration have returned to terrorism. But some lawmakers fear countries that have received Gitmo detainees like Ghana and Uruguay cannot properly monitor them.
Ghana is a wonderful place. It's a wonderful country. But the fact is that it doesn't have top-notch intelligence or law enforcement services to deal with this kind of problem.
As more detainees become eligible for transfer, the Gitmo detention process remains hotly debated.
Now, I'm not for releasing anybody who was guilty, but I'm also not for keeping people in prison year after year after year after year with no trial.
If one child is saved because she would have been blown up by someone who's being released, it's better to keep all 90 of those people in Gitmo.
The option of moving detainees from Guantanamo to American soil still remains against the law. Carla Babb, VOA News, the Pentagon.
With tens of thousands of migrants are stuck in Greece, the country is bearing the burden of Europe's refugee crisis. But Athens is still battling with its EU creditors over the terms of its latest $94 billion bailout while struggling to cope with the migrant influx. Here is Henry Ridgewell.
Migrants departing Lesbos Island for the mainland praise the volunteers who have looked after them. They respond in turn on the dockside below. A small army of activists, aid workers, doctors and ordinary citizens have filled the glaring holes in the Greek state's ability to cope with the crisis. There are volunteers from across the world, but many Greeks have also responded.
The country least prepared, the population least prepared to shoulder this crisis has shown an enormous preparedness to shoulder it, actually. But in reality, it's not paradoxical. People understand hardship.
Just 9 months ago, Greece was on the brink of bankruptcy. Long lines formed at cash machines ahead of a feared exit from the euro currency. Defying protests and the result of a referendum, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras eventually accepted the terms of a new EU bailout in return for further austerity. Critics say that has left him powerless in negotiations with Brussels over the migrant crisis.
The minute that happened, Tsipras lost all leverage and all his bargaining chips. So at the moment, all he's trying to do is plea for some help in the hope that this would ring a bell with the European Union institutions.
But not so far. The EU is refusing to hand over the latest tranche of bailout money or discuss debt relief until it sees further tax and pension reforms. The latest talks between Greece and its creditors broke down Sunday without agreement and will resume next week. There are signs of sympathy for Athens.
We also need some understanding for Greece's situation, which is simultaneously dealing with pensions, the level of taxes, and the necessary means to accommodate refugees. That's complicated. There are not a lot of governments which could cope with that.
The EU has earmarked $782 million to cope with the migrant influx, much of it destined for Greece. The country is preparing to host thousands of EU immigration personnel to help implement the new migrant deal with Ankara, which calls for sending all new arrivals back to Turkey. But major aid organisations, including the UN's refugee agency, have withdrawn staff from island facilities, saying they refuse to be complicit in what they called a mass expulsion operation. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, Lesbos, Greece.
Rwandan women living in the United States recently gathered here in Washington, D.C. to explore the challenges and opportunities they face while living outside of their motherland. VOA's Eddie Rema tells us more.
The meeting was the first of its kind and featured a series of discussions ranging from unlocking the strengths of Rwanda women here in the United States, how to raise the next generation of successful Rwandans, and staying connected with their homeland. Speaking at the event, the First Lady of Rwanda, Jeannette Kagame, who was the keynote speaker, called upon the diaspora to instill a sense of mission and responsibility in their children and to hold on to them their Rwandan heritage.
So those of us who grew up abroad know all too well the challenges of starting a new life. In a host country, we all had to consistently juggle between the necessity to hold on to our heritage and the imperatives to adapt to new cultures and traditions.
One of the major issues raised at this gathering was how to strike a balance between preserving Rwandan values at the same time embracing the American way of living.
We're going to show them how Rwandans are hardworking people, how Rwandan women can actually raise children, go to work, have a work-life balance, and at the same time still be able to improve the same values that we've learned from back home to here, implement the culture in our children, have them learn Kinyarwanda, the dances, and have basically create a little Rwanda in America.
Also, it was nice to see all the women get together to discuss how to raise their next generation, how to be a productive member of the society in the diaspora while preserving their heritage as Rwandans.
At this inaugural U.S.-Rwanda Women Diaspora Convention, Rwanda was hailed for its efforts of empowering women by giving them access to decision-making positions. Currently, Rwanda leads the world in women representation in parliament. 64% of the seats are held by women.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at Linor Mudu. Coming up, the World Health Organization calls on countries to unite to end tuberculosis. Stay with us.
News and notes. This is Living Better.
There's no certain way to prevent dementia in individuals. We might be able to reduce the numbers of people perhaps by 10, maybe 20, maybe even 30%.
That's Dr. Simon Ridley with Alzheimer's Research UK talking about a new study that concludes that exercise and healthful eating habits can dramatically decrease the risk of getting dementia. The conclusion seems like common sense to people on the streets of London.
It doesn't surprise me because I can even tell from a personal point of view that exercise and healthy eating makes me feel so much better.
If you get plenty of exercise and keep your mind active, that you will sort of stave off dementia and Alzheimer's, things like that.
Some 45 million people worldwide are living with dementia, a number that is expected to nearly triple by 2050. There's no cure for it, but experts say that not smoking and staying active may help people to keep their minds healthy. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Thursday, March 24th, marks World Tuberculosis Day. The World Health Organization is calling countries and partners to unite to end tuberculosis. The WHO reports that over 4,000 people lose their lives each day to tuberculosis. More than 95% of TB deaths occur in low and middle-income countries, and TB ranks alongside HIV and AIDS the world's top infectious disease killer. The WHO End TB strategy aims to end the global TB epidemic with targets to reduce TB deaths by 95% and to cut new cases by 90% between 2015 and 2035. Now joining us live via Skype from Geneva, Switzerland is Diana Ruel, coordinator with the Global TB Program of the World Health Organization. Ms. Vel, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So the WHO is calling on countries and partners to unite. What is expected of them at this stage? What hasn't been done before that needs to be done at this point?
Right. We have a new strategy, the WHO NTB strategy, as you've mentioned. And so we're calling on governments as well as civil society and communities themselves, researchers and the development agencies and community worldwide to unite to bring the innovations that we know are needed so that we can drive down TB deaths and incidents by 2030 in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. And we believe it's viable because we have opportunities out there with many countries already moving in many of the new ways we think are needed to get there.
Now, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, in his message to World TB Day, said that the Millennium Development Goal target of reversing TB has been achieved. However, millions of people still die or are infected by the disease. What is your comment?
Right. That target wasn't a terribly ambitious one with the Millennium Development Goals. The target at that time was just to turn around the epidemic because it had been going up for years, including in Africa. And so we were able to turn around the epidemic through the efforts of governments worldwide. And so we stopped the epidemic, and now we want to get rid of the epidemic altogether.
So today we see that there is a co-infection with TB and HIV that is making the fight against TB much more challenging, perhaps, than before. What is the most pressing issue? What is the most difficult as of today? Is it the co-infection TB, HIV, or drug resistance? Because we see also an increasing rate of drug resistance TB.
That's right. We have two major challenges with the co-epidemic of TB and HIV and multi-drug-resistant disease. However, we also have strategies now that countries are putting in place that helps coordinate responses to the HIV epidemic and take advantage of the new diagnostic technologies we have, antiretroviral treatment, as well as TB treatment, to enable people to get the full care they need for both diseases and to prevent both infections altogether. And for drug resistance, we have regimens, treatment regimens for people that can treat and cure a majority of multi-drug resistant disease. The biggest challenges for us is that a majority of cases with multi-drug resistant TB today aren't being reached through treatment programs. So we have a long way to go to expand diagnosis and treatment for drug resistance. But we also have the strides we've made against TB and HIV, with the majority of TB patients in Africa and elsewhere where the burden is greatest being detected now, whether they have HIV infection, and being offered the services they need. So we've made strides there. We still have many uncovered, but we want to move further. One of our best strategies for responding to both of these threats is to involve communities more, engage non-governmental organizations, and really mobilize the resources so the new tests and diagnostics that we have and the new treatment drugs, we have 2 new drugs available today, can reach many more of the people in need, particularly the poorest communities and marginalized communities that are most at risk for TB.
But quickly, don't we need more in terms of research and development, given that some of the tools perhaps are not so efficient anymore?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, which is why our WHO NTB strategy highlights that one of the 3 major areas of work is, in fact, research and development. So we have over $1 billion lacking every year in research financing needed for those clinical trials for new drugs, whole new regimens that could treat TB in a much shorter period of time and with much less toxicity than what people face in their treatment today. And we also need a vaccine that could help prevent TB altogether. And we also want tests like in HIV that could be available in every health center for testing for TB infection and disease. So we have a long way to go, but we have a clear strategy to take us there.
We have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Diana Well, for joining us. And that was Diana Well with the Global TB Program of the World Health Organization. Now, researchers at Cape Town University in South Africa have found that a low-cost urine test that detects tuberculosis in people living with HIV can save thousands of lives. Study author Ketan Deda says diagnosing TB in patients with HIV is difficult because conventional tests require taking an X-ray of the chest and a mucus sample, though for severely ill patients, it can be hard to produce mucus. The urine test, which costs less than $3, provides results in 25 minutes and does not require a mucus sample. The test was particularly effective in identifying TB among patients with advanced HIV infection who were most vulnerable to TB. The study is published in the Lancet Medical Journal. It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, what Egypt is doing to boost its tourism industry. We'll be right back.
Le gouvernement doit dire comme ce que demande la communauté internationale.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They tell you what people are talking about. So, for an in-depth look at the stories trending high on social media, turn to #VOA. It's not your typical talk show. From politics to pop culture, #VOA brings in the people leading the conversation, engages the audience, and gets answers to your questions. #VOA. Smart talk for smart people.
Now to Egypt. In an effort to boost Egypt's flagging tourism industry, skydivers recently participated in a high-flying competition, jumping from helicopters over Egypt's Great Pyramids. Hamada El Rassam has our report.
Skydivers say the competition at Egypt's famed Great Pyramids was aimed at attracting more visitors to the country. Egypt has suffered a $1.3 billion drop in tourism revenue over the past few months. More than 200 skydivers from 17 countries took part in the recent 3-day competition. Skydivers jumped from more than 1,100 meters high and tried to land as close as possible to their targeted spot. Organizers say this event sends a message to the world.
أنا بقول إن مصر في أمان.
Egypt is strong and it will never be affected by all the chaos going on. We want to emphasize to the world that our country is safe and tourists are welcome.
Tourism is one of the most important sectors of Egypt's economy. The suspected terrorist downing of a Russian plane over North Sinai last year badly hurt the tourism industry, driving away nearly 4 million tourists. To bring them back, analysts say Egypt needs to not only better market the industry, but review its security policies.
What is required is actually some kind of a multi-dimensioned plan. You need to, first of all, reassess all the counterterrorism strategies that have been going on for the past 2 years, because Egypt has been in an official open war against terrorism since 2013. So where did that go? Where did that lead? How effective were these strategies? This needs to be reviewed. On the other hand, the Egyptian tourism sector needs to be marketed in a lot more professional manner than it is right now.
While sporting events are good publicly, he says the government needs to do more to support and protect the tourism industry. Hamada El Rassam for VOA News, Cairo.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 300 and 600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching, and good night from Washington.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Butterflies are some of the most beautiful creatures in the world. The way they float along in the air is so lovely. But what does it mean to have butterflies? Let's see how to use this phrase in a conversation.
Hey Anna, how did your presentation go yesterday?
Oh, it went well, but I had butterflies in my stomach the whole time. Speaking in front of a large group of people like that always makes me nervous.
To have butterflies means you feel nervous or excited about something. You might know the feeling of having butterflies in your stomach before a very important event. You can have butterflies before a big test, when you're on a first date, or like Anna, during a presentation. And that's English in a Minute.